There's a common misconception going around the internet that Fate Stay Night is an overly complex mess of a series that is impossible to start. And that's not entirely wrong. However, I've always taken issue with the last bit of that idea, because while the series may be extremely overcomplicated and have way too many clashing timelines and alternate narratives, I've never found it to be difficult to get into. So with this week's video, I want to dispel that myth once and for all and offer a full, no bullshit introduction to the Fate Stay Night universe. Consider this your one-stop guide for where to start and what to watch if you want to get the gist of the Fate universe. Now, I should note that the Fate franchise is absurdly massive, and it spans just about every form of media, from books to games to movies, and of course anime. So to keep things simple, I'm going to focus primarily on anime and movie content, as that is what is most important for a new fan of the Fate franchise to see. So with that, let's begin and take our first steps into the Fate Stay Night universe. If you ask most Fate fans where to start the series, they'll probably say something like, oh, you can start in two places, either here or here, or they may tell you to read the original visual novel, but that's boring and complicated. So here I am to tell you there is one place that you should start, Fate Zero. If you ask me, Fate Zero is the best entry to the series because it requires you to have no prior knowledge. It explains all of its concepts, and it sets up characters that become staples of the Fate universe. Some may combat this and say, if you watch Fate Zero first, it spoils certain aspects of Fate Stay Night. But let me tell you, as a longtime fan that started with Zero, those spoilers are minimal, and having the understanding that Zero provides will boost your enjoyment of the series more than the extremely light spoilers will detract from it. It is also worth noting that should you start with Fate Stay Night, you will spoil certain aspects of Zero that definitely detract from the show in more impactful ways than Zero detracts from Stay Night. Overall, Zero is a much better entry point to the series, and I would recommend starting with it. So, we have the entry down, but where do we go from there? And that is where things start to get a bit more complex. After Zero, the next story will be Fate Stay Night, the original plotline that started it all. This is where things get complicated, so bear with me while I explain what Fate Stay Night is, and then we can move on to what to watch after Zero. I promise everything will make sense, we just need to lay some groundwork first. So, the thing about this entry is that it was originally a visual novel for the PC, which would later receive ports to PS2, Vita, and mobile platforms. The plot of Fate Stay Night diverges into three main routes, each of which has its own anime adaptation. These routes each have their own name, and in them you end the game with a different girl. So, to start, there is the Fate route, where you end up with Saber. Next is the Unlimited Blade Works, or UBW route, where you end up with Rin. And finally, the Heaven's Feel route, where you end up with Sakura. Unlike other visual novels with alternate romantic interests, these routes are extremely different depending on which one you choose. So in this case, it really is worth it to try and experience them all at some point. But for now, let's just talk about what options you have for adaptations and which one is the best to start with, because this is where you'll want to continue your Fate journey. As stated earlier, each of the three routes has at least one major adaptation to anime or anime film. For the Fate route, there is one anime adaptation. It was released in 2007 by Studio Dean and consists of 24 episodes. This is currently the only anime adaptation to cover Saber's route from the visual novel, but unfortunately, it isn't looked upon very fondly. The animation doesn't look very good, and the overall quality of production isn't as high as some of the other adaptations available. The next route, however, is Unlimited Blade Works. UBW actually has two adaptations. Its first is a film released in 2010, and the second is a full 2-core anime produced by Ufotable in 2014. The film is once again produced by Studio Dean, and as such, it suffers from the same poor quality as the Fate route, so you can pretend this one doesn't exist. However, the anime adaptation of UBW by Ufotable is excellent. Ufotable did a killer job at animating and fleshing out the world of Fate. Also, its extra runtime compared to the film allows for it to be a more thorough adaptation that can cover more of the original story. Whenever you hear people discuss UBW, it's most likely that they're referring to this adaptation as it is one of the most popular pieces of Fate media. Lastly, we have the Heaven's Feel route. This is the latest route to be adapted, and it only has one adaptation, although that adaptation is split amongst three films. These films were produced by Ufotable, and the first was released in 2017, the second in 2019, and the third actually released this month in Japan, but it has yet to be localized. These films are of the same quality as UBW, and that makes perfect sense because it's made by the same studio. Okay, now we know what our options are, but which should you watch after Zero? The best adaptation to watch after Zero is without a doubt the UBW anime. The length of a full 2-core anime means the show has ample time to convey all of its core concepts to the viewer. It also helps that UBW was designed as an entry point for the series, so any questions you may have had about the Fate universe that Zero didn't answer will be covered here. The Heaven's Feel movies are great, like really great. but I wouldn't watch those until after you've seen UBW, because I believe they go a bit more in depth and require a bit more understanding of the Fate Stay Night story to fully enjoy. But once you have that, they are probably some of the best the Fate universe has to offer. So to summarize our timeline so far, start with 0, then go to UBW. After UBW is where things get even less linear, as Fate 0 and Fate Stay Night are really the only stories that take place in a linear timeline. What that means is after you've seen those two anime, the world is your oyster. Pretty much anything that catches your eye in the Fate universe can be consumed, as it will most likely be standalone content. So from here, let's drop the timeline and move into post-UBW recommendations. Okay, so right out the gate, you've just finished Fate 0, you speed ran through all of UBW, and now you want more Fate content, but where to look? For starters, there's Fate Apocrypha, which is totally disconnected from just about everything else in the Fate franchise. This means you can enjoy it as a self-contained story without the commitment of a big series to parse through. I should note that Fate Apocrypha has definitely gotten mixed reviews, but if the universe and lore interests you as much as the themes and tones, then you will still probably enjoy it. In fact, for most of the Fate spin-offs, that rule applies. Unfortunately, many of the Fate franchise's spin-offs fail to capture the magic of what 0 and Fate Stay Night had, but they survive off of the fascinating lore and systems that exist in the Fate universe. Also, usually the characters are fun and interesting, so while the spin-offs may struggle to capture the depth and thematic genius of the first two entries, they're still very entertaining and worth your time. Moving on to another self-contained option is Lord El Malloy II's Case Files, Rail Zeppelin Grace Note. What a fucking name. This show follows Waver Velvet, one of the best characters from Fate 0, but much later in his life. This show is also a standalone work and only consists of 13 episodes. For this anime, you will do best if you've seen Fate 0, since the protagonist, Waver Velvet, was introduced as a main character there. This show is pretty interesting, and it takes a different spin on the Fate franchise that is a bit less grandiose, so if you're looking for a more grounded and tight-knit story, this could be the show for you. Alright, so by now, you should have a solid idea of where to start, what to watch, and what to expand into. However, if you've been exposed to anything Fate related on the internet, then it's probably apparent to you that I have yet to bring up one of the biggest parts of the Fate universe: Fate Grand Order. Fate Grand Order is where most of the confusion around Fate comes from, because not only is it the largest and most complex continuous narrative in the Fate universe, but it is also currently the most popular part of it. So, I am going to do my very best to break it down as simply as possible so that you have an understanding of what Grand Order is and how to consume it. So Grand Order is originally a mobile game that functions on summoning heroic spirits. You use your team to go through different points in time and stop devastating events that threaten the survival of humanity. And in doing so, you get to see different historical periods and stories that take place in the Fate universe. These stories are mostly self-contained, with the only links being the protagonist and a certain few characters that accompany you on your journey. In Grand Order, there are 7 major events, or story arcs, that each have their own storyline. However, these story arcs can each function as their own narrative, and as such, they do not need to be consumed in a linear order. What this means is that the primary way to experience all that Grand Order has to offer is through the mobile game, but there's a catch. If you're anything like me, the gacha semi-pay-to-win gameplay probably doesn't appeal to you that much. So, what are your options? Well, unfortunately, the adaptations of Grand Order have been released rather haphazardly and out of order. So, if you're looking to consume the story all at once in its linear order, then the game is your best bet. However, like I mentioned earlier, these stories in the game are usually self-contained, and if you develop an understanding of the core cast and the core mechanics, then you can consume each story more or less on its own in whatever order you wish. I'm sure some people will disagree with this, and it definitely isn't the most ideal way to consume Grand Order. But for someone who absolutely refuses to play the game, such as myself, this is as good as it gets. So with all that groundwork out of the way, let's look at the adaptations we have so far. There are currently 2 major Fate Grand Order adaptations worth watching. The first is a 4TV anime film called Fate Grand Order First Order, and the second is a 2-core anime called Fate Grand Order Absolute Demonic Front Babylonia, or Fate Grand Order Babylonia for short. First Order covers the prologue of the mobile game, and sets up the core mechanics of Grand Order and how things work. This film will introduce you to the world of Grand Order and give you a foundation to understand the individual stories seen in the game. This means that by watching this, you can essentially understand any other Fate Grand Order story, even if you haven't played through the game. Now, Babylonia is an adaptation of the 7th and last main story arc in the mobile game. So if you've seen First Order, then you should be good to go here, as it works on the same concepts explained there, and doesn't require you to have seen the previous 6 arcs. There are also 2 movies currently in production that are going to adapt the 6th arc from the mobile game, the first of which is slated to debut in December. So, to sum up Grand Order and put a nice little bow on it, here is how to watch. The best option for the full story is to play the game. If you don't wish to play the game, that's fine. Watch First Order and then watch Babylonia and keep an eye out for the movie whenever it drops in December. So there you have it. Those are most of the relevant Fate franchise works that you should look at if you're at all interested in Fate as a concept. A couple more fringe recommendations for those of you who enjoyed what you've seen here would be things like Fate Collide Liner Prisma Ilia, which is an alternate take on the Fate universe that's kind of a magical girl show, kind of not. This one's kind of weird. I never finished it, but supposedly it gets very good. And then, if you want my personal recommendation, the absolute best thing that the Fate franchise has to offer is a 13-episode miniseries where Shiro cooks for the cast of Fate Stay Night. I shit you not, that is all that show is about, and I absolutely love it. It is the most comfy shit I have ever seen, and you should totally watch it. With that, you're officially a Fate franchise expert. So go forth to your anime streaming site of choice with confidence in your newfound knowledge of the Fate universe and begin your journey into one of the most complex yet rewarding series anime has to offer. If this video helped you in getting started with Fate, or you just found it entertaining to watch, let me know in the comments. I love to see your guys' response to my stuff, and I'll try to reply if I see it. Also, if you have any friends who may be interested in Fate but don't know where to start, send them this video. I'm sure it'll make things a bit clearer for them. That said, I just want to say thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.